In case you didn't know, we will be recording this symposium today. So the cameras are up on the stage. So welcome everyone. If you will, take your seat, get comfortable. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bob Hyland. I'm an associate professor educator in the Department of English here at the University of Cincinnati. And we want to welcome you to Probasco Auditorium for the 2022 Environmental Justice and Advocacy Symposium. We have a great program for you this evening, and we hope you have a good time and make some good connections. Before we get started, I do want to make a little bit of a contrast here. At EJAS 2021, we were talking about an invisible molecular level threat that, even though it's that small and we can't see it, was of global consequence, and those are forever chemicals. This year, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to bring it home. We're going to get hyper-local, and we're going to be in conversation with people who live in environmental justice communities right here in the greater Cincinnati area. So as you can see, the theme for today is uplift, and my goal is that we all walk out of here with an attitude and a spirit of working together and uplifting each other for environmental justice. So on that note, let's actually get started in that spirit. If you'll humor me and take 30 seconds and just look around you at the people who you don't know, make eye contact and smile at them and silently say to them, "I'm here to uplift you." Thank you. Thank you for hearing me. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. Come on, let's get pumped up. All right, so before we get started with the program, I do need to acknowledge some amazing supporters and colleagues without whom none of this would be possible. So first, I want to thank the Provost Office and especially Associate Vice Provost Dr. Keisha Love for the Interdisciplinary Faculty Team Award that has supported our work to develop an environmental justice curriculum here at UC, as well as this year's EJAS. And along those lines, I need to thank my colleagues on the award. So Dr. Laura Anderson, who's in the Department of English, Dr. Nicholas Dunning, Department of Geography, Professor Leah Stewart, who is also in the Department of English, Dr. David Stradling, Department of History and Director of the Environmental Studies Program, and Dr. Susanna Tong, who is in the Department of Geography. So let's hear it for those folks. Thank you all for your collegiality and collaboration. I also need to thank the Environmental Writing and Environmental Studies capstone students who will be presenting their work during the poster session today. Most, if not all of them, are here. And they've had to put up with me all semester. They're done at 6 o'clock tonight, so phew. A special shout out to one of those students, rhetoric and professional writing student, Mike Schlott, who designed this year's EJAS logo. Way to go, Mike. So in all seriousness, though, thank you, students. Thank you for your dedication, your hard work. You give me hope that collectively we can achieve justice, including environmental justice. You're an inspiration to me, and I hope I am to you. Finally, at events like these, there's always somebody behind the scenes making everything work, and without whom the event doesn't happen at all. And for us today, that person is Mr. Alan Booth, who is the coordinator of digital media for the College of Arts and Sciences. Thank you, Alan. We appreciate you. Let's hear it for Alan. So then it is with great delight that I now introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Lauren Forbes, who is an interdisciplinary urban policy scholar studying food systems, community development, and cultural resilience in racially segregated neighborhoods. Her research centers Black community healing and wealth building through local food-based economies and uses frameworks of racial capitalism, social determinants of health and policy feedback theory to engage questions about reducing racial disparities in health and wealth and improving the quality of relationships between local governance, nonprofit actors, and low-income families with children. She explores policy and public administration questions related to political mobilization, public interest, social value, urban sustainability, and American political development. Dr. Forbes earned a PhD from Georgia State University in 2022 in public policy, a master's in public health from Drexel University in 2013, and a bachelor's of science in biology from Oregon State University in 2011. So it is my honor and my pleasure to bring to the stage for our keynote address, Dr. Lauren Forbes.
Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for that warm welcome, and thank you, Bob, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. The fact that you all chose to be here on a Friday afternoon at the end of the semester is pretty impressive. As Bob mentioned, I teach in the School of Public and International Affairs in the Masters of Public Administration program. We're located not far from here, actually just across the street, in a lovely concrete fortress known as Crosley Tower. My research is situated at the intersection of racial inequality, community development, and environmental justice. I am especially interested in local food systems and their potential to not only provide food access, but also to advance social and racial justice objectives. When I sat down to think about what I might share with you all today, and this conference theme of uplift, I started to reflect back on my earliest moments of awareness about environmental inequality and its connection to human health. As a child, I spent quite a bit of time outdoors, playing in the backyard with my cousins and pruning rose bushes with my mom. My dad, an avid outdoorsman, would take my cousin and I on many fishing and hiking trips around the city of Portland, where I'm from. I also went camping regularly with my extended family, which was always a really fun time. However, to be honest, we weren't exactly doing real camping. It's kind of glamping, but we did roast marshmallows, pick blackberries, and catch grasshoppers for my cousin to use as fishing bait. These experiences growing up as a child in the Pacific Northwest allowed me to be immersed in the incredible beauty and mystery of nature. In all, it was a pretty great suburban childhood. It wasn't perfect, of course, but it was definitely privileged. I grew up an only child in a middle-class household, and while we certainly weren't rolling in dough, I never once went hungry. I never had to worry about where my next meal would come from, or whether there would be heat in our home at the wintertime, or if the tap water that I drank was safe. In fact, our tap water in Portland comes from the Bull Run watershed, which, according to my dad, is some of the best tap water in the country. It actually does taste quite a bit better than other tap waters, but I think that might just be the lack of added fluoride. Anyway, I didn't realize it quite then like I see it today, but my privilege insulated me from exposure to many of the environmental and social injustices that others have to struggle against on a daily basis. Right around my sophomore year in high school, I began to think more critically about the world around me in relation to systems and patterns of injustice. I was doing a summer internship with the School of Nursing at Oregon Health and Sciences University, and I was invited to join a nurse there on a visit to a migrant farm in rural Oregon. She went to these farms periodically during the growing season to provide much needed health care to the many undocumented migrant workers there. I went with her in a mobile clinic and saw firsthand the dangerous living and working conditions of the migrant workers there. One after one, I saw these people, children and elderly included, coming into the mobile clinic for serious health conditions and farm injuries related to overwork and exposure to toxic pesticides. I later learned that most of the farms that migrant workers work on are not subject to OSHA inspections. The result is that these workers are regularly exposed to workplace hazards and injuries that endanger their lives. This injustice is worsened by their compounded vulnerabilities of their undocumented status and poverty, which make them easily exploitable by their employers. I remember being horrified about these conditions, and perhaps even more so, I was angered to learn that all of this was occurring on a wide scale, largely outside of the awareness and concern of the general public. At the same time, I had to sit with the reality of my own complicity as a consumer in fueling a food system that is based in the exploitation of migrant labor. Like most people, I enjoyed finding grapefruits for $1 and a bag of cherries for $1.99 at the local grocery store. The lower the price, the better for my budget. However, this low pricing is largely made possible because of the widespread exploitation of migrant labor. I later learned that migrant farmers in Oregon generate around $3 billion annually in revenue. And yet, to this day, most of them are living under the federal poverty line. This is just one example of the many ways that our personal interests can get invested within systems of oppression. We may not individually be responsible for creating these systems, but we are all complicit in sustaining them through our actions and our inactions, some of us more than others. For this reason, I believe we have a responsibility to work towards justice and reparation for all historically and structurally oppressed communities. If anyone is interested in learning more about migrant labor injustices in the food system, I suggest checking out Christina Cook's article. She did a great investigative journalism series on migrant farm labor exploitation called Injured and Invisible. Also on that note of migrant labor, for those of you who have been enjoying the World Cup games, like I have, you may have heard that somewhere between 400 to 500 migrant workers lost their lives in the construction of the World Cup facilities. 400 to 500 lives. I don't know which is more disturbing, the sheer number of individuals who died or the offhand way in which their death was reported to the international media. As the late Dr. Paul Farmer, an internationally respected global health expert, once said, the idea that some lives matter less than others is the root of all that is wrong with the world. When I think about the violence of migrant farm labor exploitation that I witnessed in high school in relation to this conference theme of uplift, I think about something Mirabai Collins shared with me. Mirabai is the lead farmer and co-director of Black Futures Farm in Portland. I interviewed her and her husband, Malcolm, as part of my dissertation research 2 years ago. She brought up this concept of a righteous payment and used the term in reference to the higher pricing in locally controlled farmers markets relative to the higher pricing in larger big box grocery stores for the same products. As Mirabai explained it, higher pricing in farmers markets reflects the value of the labor and the life of the farmers behind the product. When people make their righteous payment, they are engaging in a reciprocal sacrifice between food producers and consumers that is based in human value, dignity, and respect. This type of exchange centers people over profit margins and is not only morally and ethically right, it also enables individuals and their families to survive and thrive. Local food systems in which the righteous payment is exchanged also have many potential benefits for the environment. Food that is sourced locally produces less gas emissions, and it is often grown using agricultural techniques that are beneficial to the soil, water, and air. These farming methods that support environmental health are often referred to as regenerative or sustainable agriculture. Many people, including the mainstream media, tend to frame this type of agriculture as a recent innovation of the alternative food movement. However, these are actually the traditional agricultural practices of Black farming communities and Indigenous peoples, whose land we all continue to occupy to this day. While I am a huge advocate of local food systems and farmers markets, I realize that $7 for a dozen eggs and $5 for a bag of 3 apples is both unsustainable and unrealistic for people earning minimum wage. Even for many people making more than minimum wage, this isn't sustainable. And yet everyone needs to eat. The problem is that many policy solutions to address food access issues in the city, issues that generally only exist in low-income, racialized urban neighborhoods abandoned by corporate grocers, are driven by market demand and political power. Ongoing narratives about food scarcity and poor behavioral choices lead to policies like federal subsidies for commodity crop growers and nutrition education programs for people who live in food deserts. These types of policies mask and even exacerbate both racial injustice and environmental degradation. It is not coincidental that affluent communities, whether in the suburbs or in gentrified urban neighborhoods, have access to a variety of options for fresh, nutritious food, while neighborhoods of racially and spatially segregated urban poverty are saturated with fast food and often lack a single grocery store. I seek to live my life by the biblical principle, do unto others as you would want others to do unto you, also known as the golden rule. I believe this principle speaks to two foundational truths: the inherent and equal value of all people and the responsibility that we have to reject systems that violate that truth. This, I believe, includes the ideology of white supremacy and racial capitalism, as well as the underlying individualism, pride, and greed inherent in both. To be clear, I am using the term white supremacy to describe the ideology and structural system used to justify race-based oppression as natural and environmental exploitation as necessary for social progress. Racial capitalism is essentially the economic manifestation of white supremacy. These systems are the lifeline that sustain and link environmental, racial, and social injustices together. Regardless of whether or not you agree with me or whether you share my faith, or even whether you agree with the golden rule or not, you probably want to live in a world where the golden rule is being practiced. Imagine for a moment how vastly different this world would look if we didn't see society and the earth from this context of scarcity and competition, but rather from the perspective of mutuality and reciprocity. What if the actions that Patagonia's founder recently took to redirect all company profits to climate change mitigation became the norm instead of the exception? And what if magnanimous actions like that were also being done to end the corollary social plagues of racism and gender-based violence? I certainly don't have all the answers, but I believe that we must continue asking these questions of what if, how come, and why not? Because these are the questions that ignite bold, creative, and collective action. These are the questions that catalyze the labor organizing and police protests against climate change and police brutality that are happening today. I strongly believe that without radical courage, humility, and strategic collaboration that are seen in these activist movements, there is little possibility of social progress in a direction that uplifts justice of any kind. And without a willingness to talk openly about topics like white supremacy and racial capitalism, any solution proposed to tackle issues of social injustice and climate change will be woefully insufficient at best, and at worst, counterproductive. So what exactly does it take to uplift the cause of racial and environmental justice? In today's context, it may seem impossible to advance these issues beyond cyclical patterns of crisis and distraction. As a society, we seem to be inundated with news of climate health, climate disaster, and racist violence that at best grab the public's attention for a few days and lead to a few public statements and viral hashtags. Then shortly thereafter, these issues disappear from the mainstream headlines into the sea of public forgetfulness. Unless we are directly impacted ourselves, we quickly become desensitized to these issues. But I think the problem isn't with becoming desensitized, it's with allowing ourselves to remain desensitized, which generally leads to apathy and indifference. These patterns can seem daunting and even hopeless for those of us seeking to create meaningful policy change. Honestly, I too sometimes get discouraged, especially when I think about the complacency and hypocrisy all around us. But it's in these moments of deep frustration and despair that I am uplifted both by my faith and by the memory of monumental Black women like Fannie Lou Hamer and Ida B. Wells Barnett. These women lived in far worse social, political, and economic conditions than my own, and yet they still found the strength to not just survive, but to actively put themselves in harm's way to advance these causes by speaking truth to power. In doing so, they uplifted not only their own communities, but future generations to come. When I look at the magnitude of their legacies and that of other activists, I am deeply humbled. And I am reminded that I am not the starting and ending point of these social struggles. That may seem obvious, but I think it's an important daily reminder for us all, especially for those of us in academia. I am the beneficiary of hard-fought rights and privileges that I did not earn, rights and privileges that cost many their lives. The right to vote, the right to be educated, the privilege of breathing clean air, of drinking clean water, and of eating healthy, safe food. These rights and privileges have been unequally and inconsistently distributed across social groups in this country for generations. We all have a responsibility to change that. To do otherwise, I believe, is to stand complacent and complicit in the hypocrisy of our nation. As we continue to reflect on this conference theme of uplift and what it means for environmental and social justice, I want to share with you all a few lessons from nature that I hope will help to inspire you as you move forward in this work. These are lessons that I've learned from volunteering with urban farms and in cultivating my own little porch garden in Atlanta and now here in Cincinnati. Number one, in order for something to be born, something else often has to die. Hear me clearly when I say that this is not about some type of physical violence. This is about the natural cycle of life and death. We often think about plant seeds as being a source of life, and they are, but they are also an indication that some sort of death has occurred, either in the plant itself or in another plant that is decomposed, provided the organic matter necessary to fertilize the soil. In this way, I think it is helpful to think about justice movements as a necessary death and birth. There are some things, some practices, some mentalities, some policies, and probably even some organizations that will need to end before new possibilities can be achieved. Number two, early identification and action can prevent an outbreak. Hopefully, we learned this lesson already from COVID, but I'm actually talking about other communicable human conditions like hate, pride, and greed. When any of these are given any time or space to fester, they quickly spill over into violence and exploitation, causing harm to both people and the environment. We must be as vigilant in combating these conditions, both in ourselves and in society, as a farmer must be in preventing pests and plant diseases in their crops. Third, nature is symbiotic, adaptive, and resilient. Obviously, there are limitations here, but nature, I believe, provides one of the best templates that we have for what cooperative interaction, adaptation, and resilience look like. I believe we can look to nature for not only tangible natural resources like food and medicine, but also for strategies to deal with many of the social and environmental challenges that we face today. To this end, we have a lot to learn from the ecological wisdom and environmental stewardship of Indigenous communities around the world. I'd like to leave you all with this call to action. First, don't let the political climate or magnitude of the social challenges we're facing today leave you feeling immobilized or powerless. I think Toni Morrison put it best when she said that the very serious function of racism is to distract. This distraction, I believe, is twofold. It's distraction from the struggle for justice itself, and also distraction from your own power to fight against it. Do one thing this weekend to put your political power into action. Call, DM, or email your local elected official about a justice issue that you care about. Attend a community organizing event. Join an organization. Use your power to amplify the interests and concerns of someone else with less power. Second, pick your battles and your allies carefully. Not every situation is a battle, and not every battle is worth fighting. You have to conserve your time, energy, and resources for the most significant battles. And those are often not the ones that make primetime news. As far as those who struggle alongside you, whether you're calling them your allies, friends, comrades, or some other name, choose them carefully. Not everyone who I choose to struggle alongside looks like me or has the same interests and skill sets that I do, but we share common values and motivations behind the work that we're doing. And we challenge each other to grow in ways that would have never been possible had we been working in silos. I challenge you to make an inventory of your battles and your fellow justice warriors. Make adjustments where needed and leave room for future changes. Send them each a personalized thank you note, because everyone needs a little bit of encouragement, and we're all here to uplift one another. Third, continually question your assumptions, your beliefs, your doubts, and your values. I believe this is a critical part of being a mature adult and an independent thinker. The objective here isn't to crush and squeeze them until they fit any particular social mold, but rather to make sure they're consistent. What do you believe? Do your actions and your behaviors align with your values? Do you even know what your values are and why you have them? Ask yourselves and each other these difficult questions, because this is how we grow. And if you don't know what you stand for, please find out. Otherwise, the systems of this world will try to tell you who you are and what your values are. Once you have decided what your values are, make a post about it on social media. Share that with others. Finally, each of you is a leader, whether or not you realize it. So make sure to always lead with love. This doesn't mean never get angry. In fact, I think anger is a natural and even a necessary part of these justice struggles. But I'm talking about the radical kind of love that shatters hate, humbles the proud, and uplifts the oppressed. That is a costly kind of love. I believe it is this type of love-centered leadership that can truly change the world for the better. In fact, it's the only kind that ever has. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes. One more time for Dr. Forbes, please. So we're now going to move into the poster presentation portion of our program. That was a lot of P's. That's alliteration. So, sorry. As you can see, the posters are around the exterior of the room. We have about 25 minutes to do this. Please also feel free to take a comfort break or just stretch your legs, do what you have to do. And then we'll come back together around 4:05 for the panel session. Enjoy. Thank you. Everyone, please do take your seats so we can keep moving forward. Thank you. Thank you so much. Panelists, if you'd like to come up and join me here on stage, that would be great. How are those posters? How about the students this semester? So it is my pleasure to introduce the 2022 EJAS panel to all of you. As I said, we're bringing it local, we're bringing it home, and we do have some very special guests here who live in environmental justice communities in the greater Cincinnati area. And they are Miss Celeste Treese and Miss Donna Bollinger. Let's give them a round of applause, please. We're also joined by Dr. Nick Newman. Dr. Newman is with Cincinnati Children's Health and Medical Center. Dr. LaTanya Jackson. And then three of the students who you've met, Daniel Winters, Dave Lecht, and Tony Bardell. And what I'd really like to do is have this be interactive. I'd like you to ask the questions that you have, but just to get us started, if I may. So Ms. Bollinger, Ms. Treese, Middletown and the village of Lincoln Heights, the communities in which you live, are by definition environmental justice communities. And to help our audience and myself better understand what this means in practical terms, would you describe the kinds of environmental risks and concerns you and your neighbors are faced with on a daily basis?
Okay, well, I can start. So that's correct. I service the residents of Lincoln Heights. I work in Lincoln Heights, and so I'm there a lot. I think that when you think about environmental justice, you need to think about what the built environment looks like and what are the implications of your built environment and what that means for your community. Uniquely, the village of Lincoln Heights is surrounded by pollution. If you think of it as a triangle, one side of the village is a outdoor police firing range. Another side of the triangle would be the expressway of 75. And on the other end, you have an industrial park. So if you just think about the air pollution as well as the sound pollution, just from all of those factors, with a community who does not have a lot of green space. There's empty space, but we wouldn't consider it green because a lot of it is vacant lots or abandoned homes. And so thinking about what do you deal with every day? You deal with the sounds of gunshots from about 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily, or if they're training dogs that day, or if they're letting off grenades that day. And then you have the constant noise of the traffic, and not let the police, maybe the bullets ricochet from the gun range and damage your home or your cars. And the residents of Lincoln Heights experienced that and have been experiencing that for over 75 years. And so the pandemic really heightened that, particularly for kids, because we were all at home for almost 2 years, and trying to work or trying to do virtual learning was just almost impossible, dealing with constant gunshots. And then if you do go outside to play, you hear the freeway, so where do you really get peace or silo within the village of Lincoln Heights? And so we, as the Heights movement, have tried to create new green spaces that the community can participate in, which is our community garden. And so that's our way of, being able to plant more trees in a community, thinking about what beautification really looks like within the village of Lincoln Heights to kind of combat some of the environmental impacts that the residents experience every day.
Mine is in Middletown. The trucks are running 24/7, 365, bringing in all kinds of coke, slag, waste products. dust from all of the constant noises, roaring explosions, awful smells like rotten eggs, chemicals, smells like metal. You can taste it. It burns and irritates your eyes or your nose or your throat. Um, Constantly, if you touch anything outside, you have black stuff on your hands. When I come outside in the morning, there's always fallout of different types from black metal pieces, glass, black particles, black splattered, white sandy gritty substance, white gray chunks, silvery particles, looks like diamond shapes, on my vehicles or anything else outside or on your house. On my vehicles makes you sneeze, cough, and irritate your throat. Can't even go outside and sit on your own porch. It puts fallout on you. Your kids can't play outside. Everything is covered in black soot. Don't know what we're breathing. Small particles getting into our lungs, PM 2.5s, high levels. A lot of people have breathing problems, respiratory infections, sinus infections, headaches. People are on oxygen, cancer. Children are born with low birth weights. We are all worried about long-term health effects and for myself, my family, and the rest of my community. Middletown.
All right, I am an environmental toxicologist and my specialty is aquatic toxicology. And my research deals with contaminants in the water and pretty much everything that's in the air, everything that comes on the ground from runoff, all the stuff that you put down the drain ends up in the waterways. Some of these waterways, a lot of these waterways are where we get our drinking water from. So even though our drinking water is cleaned and all this other stuff. There's so much that's in there that's not regulated. And even with the cleanest of drinking waters and the environmental justice communities, like I live in North College Hill, and but my research is actually nationwide. But um, the implications of my research is partially being that you can have clean water but if it's going through old lead pipes and it's coming into your homes through or into certain homes through the faucets, well, it's going to affect the residents that are living there, especially children. It's going to affect their behavior. It's going to affect their health. It's going to affect developing embryo from pregnant women. Also, not just that, in Cincinnati, I'm originally not from here. I'm from Louisiana, so I've been here now. It's going to be 4 years in January. But Cincinnati is a very old city for the most part, and there's a lot of old sewage systems, and pipes back up a lot. You have a lot of backup of sewer that ends up in people's basements, and this is unproportionately happening in lower income communities or marginalized communities. Well, this backup is not treated sewer. This is raw sewer. So these people are being exposed to bacterial and viral pathogens and God knows how many things there. So it is affecting their health. It is affecting their quality of life. It's affecting their ability to live a healthy life because it doesn't matter if they're eating all the right things, doesn't matter if they're exercising every day of the week and they're doing all the self care that they can do. Whenever you're being exposed to these things, there's nothing more that you can do. So, my research is to help in these situations to where we mitigate these problems from the start and we make things more equitable for these marginalized communities, the older communities, as it is for the newer communities that are being built up and the affluent communities, because the people in these other communities are working people. They're not they're not people that are just sitting there waiting for a handout. A lot of these people own their homes. A lot of these people are many generations into that community, and they love it. They love their community. They love their families just as much as anyone else. So I lend my expertise. I do what I can within my research and within my influence to help these communities and to actually educate the communities into what's going on. So whenever they're doing their fight as well, they're equipped with what they need to do.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Nick Newman. I'm a pediatrician and occupational medicine physician. And my research and clinical work are all related to children's environmental health. So like looking at exposures, what I've done most of my research on has been on lead and in various types of air pollution, both from cars and trucks and from industrial emissions. And the work I've done with community-based research has been in a couple of different areas. One was in lead, and part of that is lead in some ways is easy but difficult. Like lead, we've known it's been toxic for, I don't know, 2,500 years. So like that's not like a new thing for people, but we've used it so much over the last few thousand years that it's everywhere. And so the focus of that work was really to, engage with the community that we know was going to be exposed potentially through a large public works project, and to work with them to, one, like learn more about what this was, and then two, work with both city engineering, et cetera, but also the community members to say, like, what can we all do to reduce our exposure and make this less hazardous for everyone, and particularly the children. And then in another community I worked with, we were looking at some industrial emissions, and truly that was, and I can't take credit for doing all this work. Obviously, I work with lots of other really smart people, and part of that was to, one, like even describe what it was that everyone was being exposed to, because they weren't exactly sure. And then like working with the community to communicate this back to them and help them be empowered to actually tell their story and get things improved. So as a physician, I'm not content with just like sitting by and saying, oh yes, that's community over there is being exposed to countless number of things. Oh, that's just so bad, isn't it? Oh, let's go back over here. But but to think like this is happening, what can we do about it, and what can we do like to help the individuals be more empowered? So, thank you.
Is this one on too? All right. So as an environmental major, I've done some environmental research before, but I've never done it on a scope like this involving the communities as well. My area of study is typically aquatics, so I'm out there just flipping over rocks and picking up macroinvertebrates. So for me, this was a huge eye-opener to involve all these different, the community, the Sierra Club, UC Health, UC, and it was a great experience. It was difficult to try to work around everybody's schedule, everybody's school schedule, work schedule, when we could plan the community meetings, when we could go out and do testing. So it really opened my eyes to how many different variables go into these large scale environmental projects like this. It was awesome.
I suppose I learned the valuable concept of proximity, not just in space, but in time as well. I know myself and a lot of co-students here have heard a lot of stories about places like Love Canal or Warren County, things that seem situated in a different spot in a different time. And with as an amazing job as our educators do of giving us a well-rounded idea of environmentalism, this was much closer to home than I know I was ready to receive at the time. And I don't know if that was naivety, and I don't know if that was optimism, but to understand that the things that we read about that seemed so far removed from us are still going on, it broke a presumptuousness in me, and I guess exposed me to something that I can only hope will foment and make me want to continue doing this close to home work.
Hi, I'm Tony Bartle. I worked with the Middletown Project Group with Daniel and partnering with some community members like Donna. And one thing that I really learned from this project was how driven by grassroots movements a lot of environmental work is. When I first started this program, or this project rather, I kind of expected a specific outcome to be abundantly clear in the data that we collected, and that wasn't necessarily the case. Things can be slow, things can be frustrating. It can also be really reassuring when you start to partner and see all the people in your community who are also just as passionate about making positive changes as you are. So thank you guys all for being here, and thank you for listening to our project and everyone else's.
Ms. Bollinger, Ms. Treese, Drs. Jackson, Newman, and students, the theme of this year's EJAS is uplift. Historically, institutions, be they university, a governmental organization, a nonprofit organization, or corporation, have approached the work of uplifting as a unidirectional endeavor, whereby the institution assumes it has a monopoly on the solutions to uplift communities facing injustices. That's not what we mean here today. We're talking about a reciprocal relationship whereby all stakeholders and collaborators uplift each other in a shared responsibility to work for justice. We talk about then the collaborations we're discussing today and how they are or are not helping to shift the paradigm to a more collaborative approach to uplifting, and or where we can get better at that approach as we go forward.
I'll give a nod to the University of Cincinnati, and not just because it's my alma mater, uh, but because the University of Cincinnati has been a tremendous partner for the village of Lincoln Heights. Prior to their involvement in our work, we didn't really have a basis to stand on our foundings by saying, hey, we knew this gun range needed to go, but we didn't really understand all of the environmental impacts that the community was experiencing. Through our work with Professor Newman, we thought lead is going to be the biggest issue, right? Because they're shooting guns. And through our research, we actually found that lead may have not been the biggest issue that's concerning the residents when it comes to the actual distance from the gun range, but starting to look at things like sound pollution. How does that affect the residents' mental health? Looking at the air quality because they sit in an industrial park by the freeway, by a gun range, and really starting to examine what's that effect on kids. How many of our children are experiencing trauma because of these built environmental impacts? And I think that, you know, a lot of times in the past, when you think about university and community partnership, it's the university coming in and saying, hey, we've done our research here at the university, and now we know the solutions, and we're coming into your community to get your information to either say yay or nay on our hypothesis and confirm. And I think that by coming into communities and actually seeing them and examining all of the different variables, you really get the residents to be educated, for one, and then also have the tools to really advocate for themselves. When we're dealing with a lot of these environmental impacts, they involve the government or some private entity that has to make a conscious decision to end the environmental justice. And then once it is ended, how do the residents benefit from that issue? And so one of our concerns is in Lincoln Heights is we are very, very close to getting our government to get the gun range removed, but then what happens to the residents? Do they just get, oh, it's gone? How do we use the scientific data with partnerships with the University of Cincinnati to hold our lawmakers and private companies accountable because of these environmental impacts? And then how do we actually use that data along with participatory research from our residents to create solutions that are sustainable and that will really service the community? And so for BIPOC communities in particular, in my experiences, we don't see our issues as environmental issues. And it takes that nod from a University of Cincinnati or someone outside that scope to really put in perspective what it looks like to educate and motivate people to advocate for themselves. Kudos to the University of Cincinnati.
Well, there's not much to add to that because I mean, that is truly what it is. But also with as a professor and as a researcher, to actually get the input from the community and not just getting their data, but actually being invested in the communities and knowing like about their daily lives and what's going on there and getting all those details that would be missed if, you know, we just swoop in and, hey, okay, we're here. Here's our information. Okay, how many of you are sick? All right, we're gone. No, but to be invested in them and to see the changes that go on a year-round basis and to, you know, to start looking at these things and seeing what concerns the communities and giving them the resources, giving them the information that they need. And for me in particular, I also work, do some work with, in collaboration with the EPA, Ohio EPA, and the federal EPA, which, if those of you who don't know, literally is across the street from the university. So that makes it easier. So I, you know, being in contact with those research scientists as well, and they are the ones, you know, that deal with environmental policy. I mean, I think that that is a pretty cool thing. And that also gives me the voice for the community to go directly to the EPA, you know, so I think that the whole collaboration of it and with the community, the universities and government is a whole lot better. And also not just that, but the collaboration that we have on the medical side as well. I wouldn't know what I know about lead and all this other stuff and certain exposures just with my research, because my research is on fish. So, but collaborating with the medical doctors and on the medical side and to see how people that are exposed to certain things within the communities that are going to the doctors, and now the doctors are having to, you know, piece it and put it together and just having everybody collaborate in this one big web, I think is great to come about with a solution to the problems. And I think UC is doing a great job of that. And it seems like the students are very invested in it in Bob's class, but also in a lot of different classes and on campus. So this is a great thing.
I think it's really wonderful that we have something like this going on that's actually bringing different people together. And I think, you know, maybe luckily, like my first job was not as a physician and not in academia. And, you know, I came to realize that there are a lot of smart people out there who have a lot of ideas and concerns, and that doesn't just like all sit within the walls of our like ivory tower here. And but one of the things that I think we can help to do is to help to get those, you know, reach out and get those ideas and concerns out and bring them to up. I don't know if uplift is the right metaphor here, so forgive me, but like to bring it into the light so that people, other people notice it. And I think, you know, one of the collaborations, and hopefully this will come to fruition, but there's going to be a lot more opportunities for funding to try to address some of these issues. And I think one of the things that a university can do is to help community members like navigate this Byzantine process of getting funding and developing projects and making things better. Because I think, as one of my mentors many years ago said, at the time I was involved working with her studying diesel exhaust and how it affects brain development in children. And we were at a symposium not unlike this, but we were downtown, and the building was right where like 471 comes off of like Fort Washington Way, and the room was at the level of like where all the trucks were going by, which was like supremely ironic, I thought, because we were talking about diesel exhaust. And and you could see them like whizzing past the windows like the whole time. So it had a certain like dramatic twist. But she said, I think we're done studying diesel exhaust. We need to do something about it. It's like, but we've shown like every waste, since that it's bad. So like, let's do something about it. So I think, it takes a little bit of a change in how like a university works too, because like that's not necessarily like how people have like had long and successful academic careers, like by solving something. Like no, you need to keep finding more problems so you get more funding to do more research. And but I think some of these paradigms are starting to change. So there's some hope.
Yeah, I wanted to say that University of Cincinnati, the fact that they are getting data, testing and analyzing the data, with their help, we can find out a lot more about what we're breathing and what the health effects are and could be. The fact that they are scientists and are more credibility to the community. They listen to what I have to say, also took data from me to analyze it, to see what I'm being exposed to. Having professionals speak out is important. They can explain all of this to the people that doesn't know about it.
Am I allowed to ask 2 questions? Okay, because I have a question for community members and I have a question for researchers, doctors. The question to community members is, what advice do you have to community members, people who are living in communities? I mean, we're all living in communities, but you know what I mean? Who want to do a partnership, but don't necessarily know the steps to take to find who they want to partner with, or who to ask, or how does that process, how could it be better if they wanted to do something like that? Do you have any thoughts on that? And then the question for the researchers is kind of similar in the sense of, from the research side, do you feel supported by the institutions that you work in, by academia and the way things are, to prioritize community research and outreach, or is that something you kind of have to struggle for? So.
Versus, okay. I would say for communities, it's really about simple power mapping and understanding your issues, and then just having the courage to reach out to people who are experts in that field. So, for example, if you're dealing with, let's say, trash in your community, like who's the expert on trash? Who makes the actual decision about the issue, and then that's your starting point. For me as an organizer, that has been a key to a lot of our success of advocacy, is just understanding who makes decisions and not being afraid to reach out.
Right. And for me, do I feel supported by the university to do this research? Yes, most of the time. However, funding can be a huge issue when it comes to doing this type of research. So a lot of times it is going to be a matter of the heart and just doing it with or without um, extra funding. But the EPA right now it has this huge push on environmental justice, and there's a lot of funding going into it there. However, the EPA is real specific about their funding, what they want, and how they want it done. So there's support out there, but sometimes it's so specific that it doesn't allow, for those of us that are doing the research to help it get the type of funding that we need to go above and beyond and to do all that we want to do. But there is support there. We just have to keep at it.
Yeah, I think I wanted to echo what Celeste said for a second, because understanding like the power mapping is really important, because you want to be asking or directing to the people who might be able to fix your problem, or like you're going up that chain at least to get to them. And I think in terms of like institutional support, it's kind of interesting because for me personally, because I have kind of like a foot in two canoes, as my colleagues at Children say, and each institution has different priorities. And so, the university has one set of priorities and the hospital has another set of priorities that are not necessarily like mutually exclusive or evilly different or anything like that. It's just like they're different enough that you have to figure out how to navigate them. But I would say overall, there's a lot more interest and appreciation for working with community members, period, whether that's with environmental problems or whether it's trying to get people the healthcare that they need or to understand why they're not able to get it. And so I think as a university and our affiliated institutions, we're building a lot more like kind of our own internal networks about this, which like people on the outside aren't seeing. But like for years, there were lots of people doing this kind of work, but we never knew each other. And now we actually get together. And so that's actually been, it sounds like a very minor thing, but when you're navigating, large institutions, it's really helpful to have friends in other areas so that you know how to make stuff work.
Now, obviously, I can only speak from the standpoint of a student researcher, so I don't have to deal with any of the funding or any of the paperwork as far as that goes. But what I can say as a student researcher is that the staff at UC, Professor Highland, I mean, they have been so helpful and instrumental in helping to foster these partnerships in the community themselves. I mean, Donna's been rooting for us. It makes it so much easier to do research like this. So I think that UC and the community and Sierra Club have been so inspirational and so helpful to make this research an absolute pleasure to do. And
I'd like to agree with Danielle on that, and maybe add to that. I know there's some educational leaders here at UC, and I would like to remind you that we are thirsty for this kind of work. It was a common trend I was hearing a lot with my co-students, that how appreciative we were to finally be in this type of I guess direct face-to-face community-based work, to be putting so much of what we've learned into genuine application and a certain sense of measurable success that we saw, not so much in numbers, but in smiles and answers. And I'd love to see more of that. We're here for it. We don't just want to do it out of obligation. We're excited for it. It feels great, and we want to do more.
So your question was how to get in contact with people in your community if you have an issue that you wanted to bring to light that maybe you were unaware of how to communicate, essentially. Okay, I just want to make sure that I hadn't lost sight of it. Part of what I did for this project was help launch a target marketing campaign to connect community members in a small area around where we were collecting public perception data. And you would be surprised at how many other community members feel the same way that you do. And they're just looking for a way to get in contact with people as yourself. So I am an undergraduate researcher, and what I can tell you from this experience is just be your advocate. Know that you are the person that you want to be in contact with. I mean, so you should leverage your own networks as much as possible. And then obviously you can go to town halls. Um, there's people at the university that can help you, but even in your own social networks, reaching out and getting in contact with people and seeing how they feel about this is maybe a really, really good avenue to explore.
Hi, mine is sort of more of a Pandora's box, maybe of a question. I feel like in so many ways, we're sort of preaching to the choir here, and the invisible elephant in the room are those stakeholders or entities that do not practice the precautionary principles, which is largely, something that, as I understand it, in the US, it's money ahead of people. In other parts of the world, they are putting people before profit. How do we address that invisible elephant in the room?
Yeah, that's a really important aspect to this. So, I think I think it seems to me that this kind of environmental consciousness about things has been slowly building, right? And if you look back, like just look at like climate change, for instance, like a few years ago, it would have been like impossible to even think that we would be doing anything about it, and yet we are. It may not be enough, but like, well, all we can do is what we can do, right? And I think, it's this kind of evolutionary change in terms of people's thinking that's very hard to turn back, but it's very slow. And as human beings, like, we want something to happen quickly. And, I think, I've been working in the environmental health space for 15 plus years. And you really have to kind of play the long game. I think now, like, some of the work that I do, like advocacy wise, I work with the state government around lead poisoning prevention in children. And, the reason that I'm even on this committee is that, the state leadership said, oh, we need to have a physician on there who knows something about lead. And, incredible in a way that, that this group had been meeting for decades and never had anyone like that. But, we can't go back and fix what happened 20 years ago, but we can say, okay, well, we have this now, and now we have a parent representative on this group. Whereas before, the main members were basically the paint companies and real estate agents. And so, like, that's an evolutionary change. And I think what we have to do is, as those opportunities come, that we try to take advantage of them. But I think it's much easier to turn back a revolution than it is evolution. And so, don't give up.
Well, there's not too much to add to that. I mean, he said it all. Also, honestly, it's just a long, long time, because before climate change, you all heard about global warming, right? And then whenever you have something like this come along, you're gonna have a lot of resistance. And even with climate change, you have a lot of resistance. And so to have these topics in the first place in these spaces where they weren't before, and then to have environmental experts or medical experts that dealing with that, that's all, it's great. But like I said, it's gonna take a long time. It's not something that you get into and it may not even happen in our lifetime, but you know, but it's getting better.
And is this on? Yeah. So it's less a question as more of a comment uh, to both of the last two questioners. I think the word is that we adopted at my shop, my organization is persistent. And so whether you're looking for other partners, some of the people who or organizations that you may seek out might not be on the first or second try, but those organizations or people may know others that can share your fight or your issue. And so sometimes it takes a while to build those partnerships and those relationships, but being persistent and adamant in your conversations can lead to those types of relationships. As far as success is concerned, I've been in the environmental advocacy world for a couple of decades, and I've won some battles and I've lost some battles, but it takes time, unfortunately, but that's just the way, the nature of environmental advocacy over the last several decades. But again, it goes back to the word persistent. And so being an advocate for your cause or your issue and just keep at it and build partnerships and relationships, especially from a psychology standpoint, as was mentioned. So you're not in it by yourself, which can be draining, is definitely an add to how you should proceed in your fight or your advocacy.
Hello. In terms of the Lincoln Heights community, you were saying following realizing that like the most detrimental pollutant to the community was sound and not lead. How do you really like quantify that trauma caused by something like sound? And do you think following communicating that that issue was the most relevant to the community, do you feel like that marked like a shift in how the community reacted to it or addressed the issue? Especially with how Lincoln Heights has like a high rate of people moving out of the community, well, looking to move out of the community.
Yeah, I would say that there are a lot of ways to measure that. We're working with the EPA and actually University of Cincinnati to figure out what's the best way to identify what those are. But for example, just from the study that Professor Newman did as well, we found out that the residents of Lincoln Heights hear 10 times the noise of New York City. And this is every day. And one of the effects of that leads to mental health issues. So we saw people who heard violent noise pollution like gun sounds like that, they were more likely to commit suicide. They were more likely to have a violent offense. And so one of our approaches, because we are so entrenched in youth development within the Heights movement, is to understand what's the correlation of our students that have IEPs? What is our correlation of students who actually, older residents who've actually lost hearing? One of our council members, when they gave the presentation, ironically, she said, well, the gunshots don't bother me because I can't hear them, because she has hearing loss, and she didn't even put the two together after our presentation on the effects of it. But that is part of educating the residents. Her thinking that the gun range is not a major concern of hers because she can't hear, but not understanding that she can't hear because she's been in the village for over 50 years of the gun range. And she's an elected official, but still not putting together the correlation. And so for us, it's about when we are finding different results, how can we continue to educate ourselves and build advocacy is strategy. And I always say that it's all about your strategy with advocacy, and you have to have the science to back it up for you to look credible, even though science is up in the air these days from some of our elected officials.
One more round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you all. So that concludes our programming, but I do hope all of you will stay for the reception and networking, which will be down the stairs. And we have some refreshments And we would love to connect, trade business cards, talk about collaborations going forward in different communities, and just share bold ideas with one another for what's next. So thank you again, Dr. Forbes. Thank you, panelists. And thank all of you for being here.